thank you for coming. You look like the usual motley crew that's brought together by any interest in lighting in public space. Just stop me if there's stuff that doesn't seem clear from your own background or whatever, and we'll carry on from there. I just want to, as slide one shows, we're a group called Configuring Light, Staging the Social, which is a very sociological way of putting the idea that light is part of pretty much any human interaction, either light or the absence of light. So it's part of the structure. It's kind of built into all the social spaces in which we engage with each other. When you also treat it as the object of government policies, of technologies, of private enterprise, of citizen action, and so on and so forth, it also becomes a site over which we can actually debate the way in which our spaces are structured and the spaces in which we interact work for us or against us. So configuring light as a title, it's basically what it says on the tin, that light is a kind of material that's part of all social life, and we're interested in all the different processes through which it gets configured. How is it made into the stuff of everyday life? And again, that includes everything from all kinds of technologies. We're living through the biggest revolution in lighting technology since Edison. And it's not just LEDs, it's the control systems of which those LEDs are a part. We're talking about changes in regulation, that light is now configured, for example, by people who are called night czars, and who are there to kind of treat night and after dark spaces as objects of design, with light obviously centrally involved. You can go on and on like this. So I work largely with lighting designers, or as much as I can be. It's a lovely community of practice. But equally, we configure light every time we flick a switch, or drive a car with very bright headlights down a street. Okay, we're configuring light. And in the process, staging the social. As a group, you've got four names there. There's me, there's Elettra Bordenaro, who is a lighting designer, in fact. She's the one person who actually knows what she's talking about when it comes to light. There's myself and Joanne Entwistle, who are both sociologists. Jo comes out of a background in things like fashion, design, and embodiment. So that brings a quite different dimension to our experience of space. And our newest member, Lily Roberts, who is a sociologist again. And she'll come back into the story, see how much time I've got for it all. We are concerned, as I say, with how light is socially shaped, the configuring of it. We're also concerned in a wider sense with that interface between social research and design, which has been, certainly in sociology, a really powerful point of intersection, particularly in terms of thinking about words we don't like to use too much, like impact. But our sense of how we actually, as sociologists, intervene in the world. A lot of ours is done through, all our projects have been collaborations in one way or another with lighting designers or councils or other people who are professionally concerned with light. And the concern is, particularly for light, how to make a better social knowledge base for those who are actually making decisions about lighting and more broadly about the kind of shape of urban spaces. Light, although I start out by saying is universal, ubiquitous, everything is light or in some kind of light or dark, it's something that is very little thought about, very little known about. The actual knowledge base for dealing with light is terrible, okay? And even at the level of doing social research on lighting, if you ask most people about light, they will either have nothing to say or just say, I want brighter light so I will feel safer. Why? Why would that make you feel safer? Can we look at this a bit more closely? And so on. So a lot of the discussion of light is at a pretty rudimentary base. It's better now than when we started 12, 13 years ago. There's been a whole literature, there have been public debates, there have been organizations built up around both nighttime design in general and lighting more specifically. But it's still an area which, given the universality, is surprisingly little understood, and the basis for acting upon light is not good. Anyway, do please visit our website if you are interested in this kind of stuff. We've got all our projects mapped out there and at least some information about them all. We do quite a range of things, from relatively straight academic research, though again with partners. I'll talk about one. We do workshops where, again, the idea is to bring social research and lighting design together. We just finished probably the most exciting one we've done in Bangkok, funded by LSE KEI fund. The idea of these workshops, as in Bangkok, is to bring professional lighting designers or light-related professionals, urban planners and so on, together to actually work on a specific physical site and to pretend to be sociologists for a few days. That's to say, to actually get out of the studio, talk to people, work out the kind of logic of the space, what the issues are for different kinds of users, get at the diversity of how a particular space operates, and then develop a design response to that. On top of which, the fun bit is we get lighting kit donated by various lighting manufacturers, so you can do mock-ups of all of this, which looks visually wonderful, but also gets people like the community, lighting designers, counselors, and so on together to actually look at a space transformed. The one in Bangkok was very much along those lines. It was a space which was a focus of tremendous political dispute over many years, because there used to be a community of effectively squatters there who were moved out by gentrification and tourism policy, and has now become an empty park. So the idea was, how can we get lighting designers together to think about how to reactivate this, how they would deal with that history, and tell that story through forms of lighting or ways of intervening in the atmosphere and so on and so forth. So we do that kind of stuff. We also do straight consultancy, because again, it gives us access to spaces we couldn't research otherwise. So it's an opportunistic thing, but it's also a way of kind of intervening issues of lighting and the social into spaces where they don't necessarily get to. When I talk about the poor shape of a lot of thinking and talking about light, a lot of it comes down to a very basic structure which we're trying to operate against, and where sociology has a real, we can really operate as a wedge. On the one hand, this is an image of Derby, if anyone knows Derby, downtown Derby. This is light governed by a purely technical regime. This lighting was the result of a PPP arrangement where basically the lighting of Derby was handed over to a contractor, Balfour Beatty, who put in the cheapest possible lights that met the standards and addressed issues of people not feeling safe because there wasn't enough light. And Derby will now be paying rent on this lighting for the next 30 years, okay? It's horrendous, and that street is generally as empty as it is in that photo. Not only that, it feels scary. And most people feel deeply uncomfortable there. Yes, it's really bright, but it misses, everyday experience of light, which is the brighter the light here, the darker everything around looks. We've all heard of contrast, right? So everyone's walking down the street thinking, oh my God, what's happening down these side streets, okay? Everyone is terrified there. That's an example of the kind of purely technical engineering, but also, I would say, neoliberal view of lighting, okay? How do we get the most wattage, as it used to be called, for the least cost? Whoops, yeah. This is also from Derby. This is from their Marketing Derby brochure. All the photographs are of Derby at night, okay? Because it's atmospheric, isn't it, okay? When I first showed this image a long, long time ago, a friend of mine just looked up and said, what is that woman doing on the bridge? And that's where it became a kind of catchphrase in the whole research group. We're concerned about that woman. What happens between that technical view of lighting and that purely aestheticized view where it's about the city to be photographed with no live human beings in it? Where's her story here? So a lot of what we're concerned about in lighting is the way lighting tells the story of what happens to the social in public debate, in public design, and public planning, and so on. We're equally concerned with, again, I mean, lighting raises a lot of issues. I'm just cherry picking here some of the things that it gets us into. Equally, one of the divisions that lighting brings you to, and the poor thinking about lighting, is absolutely bog standard social inequality. You can see the lighting on a council estate. On the left here is a Peabody Trust estate, White Cross. The lighting on, I mean, it's lit for social disorder, for the expectation that what's required is surveillance because of incipient disorder in that space. The lighting on those balconies is so bright that people have to put bin liners over their windows so they can get to sleep, okay? And Peabody is an enlightened housing trust, okay? On the right, sorry, we couldn't screen off this so you can't see very well, but that's around the corner from the House of Parliament. It's still gas lighting, okay? Some of the remaining stuff, I mean, it's lit for heritage, it's lit for aesthetics. It's clearly about coding the city as two entirely different cities. Very briefly, this is more a slide for when I'm showing things to lighting designers and so on, but to be clear, when you're talking about lighting, what do we mean by social, the social lighting? And a lot of this goes against the ways in which a lot of lighting is actually carried out and lighting decisions are made. We've got lighting people constantly talking about human-centric lighting, okay? As if somehow you can light humans. I mean, what the hell does that mean in a city? Okay, who is a human? Aside from the species-specific problems with that sentence. Or they talk about the community. And of course, our job is to go into a place and relate lighting to the diversity of what is going on in that space, and to actually understand how people are using it, and very often, who's not using it, and why not? And can lighting do anything to change that? So we're interested, sorry, this really, I shouldn't have chosen red, I would have known. The top line should be diversity. The next one is practices. I can't remember anymore. Yeah, who's there? What are they doing? Places in the sense of what's the identity, meaning, attachment, histories that go with that place. And again, how might lighting play a part in either supporting or developing those things? And then connection. How does that space that we're working on connect outwards to other spaces that the users of that space might go? We spend a lot of time just tracing routes. How do you get to the shops? How do you get to the bus station? All of this kind of stuff. Could lighting make it easier for you to do this? Or is it getting in your way in some way? But also, again, going back to those issues of inequality, how does the lighting impact the connections between this space and, let's say, London as a whole? You know, again, you can spot a council estate, social housing, a mile off. What does that say about connection? Is there some way that lighting can be used to kind of make connections rather than to disrupt them or to play with them in some way? I think I've kind of said that. We use the usual toolkit, but just to spell it out a little bit, the whole program comes roughly out of an ethnographic background. That's to say, we make up our methods in relation to the place that we're trying to make sense of. Okay, so it's always a mixture of interviewing, observation, mapping, spatial analysis, and so on. but with a lot of in situ work with workshops, walkabouts, and so on and so forth. Really important to actually get people, including designers, out into the space, getting into the micro logics of how it works and how they experience it. I've got a few minutes. Yeah. I'll just give you a few examples then that kind of flesh this out a bit, and then let's go for some questions. This is a project in Southwark, a social housing estate called Brandon 3. When we started, and to some extent still, as soon as you say you're working on lighting, everyone just says, well, you're working on safety, aren't you? You know, about feeling safe at night. So we avoided that issue for several years in order not to start from that question, but actually to start thinking about lighting from other spaces, other positions, rather than just safety and security. But when we got to Brandon 3, it was absolutely dead central, and we faced it directly. Brandon 3 is part of a program in Southwark called Great Estates, where they took, I think it was 20 estates, and made small-scale interventions, not massive renovation. But what are the small things, like putting in a playground or a park or whatever, that might make a disproportionate kind of change to life in general on the estate? And lighting was a really good candidate for that. You can both make changes and demonstrate change very, very quickly. Everything looks different when you put the lights on. The safety element was that there had been 2 murders on the estate. To make a very long story short, the council responded by putting in what we call prison yard lighting. That's to say, massively powerful lights, incredible amount of CCTV, and blocking off pathways that guys would go around on scooters, okay? What was interesting about the story, and lighting becomes very symbolic very quickly. Those lights were treated immediately as signs that the council cared, that they were actually willing to do something. They responded, all this kind of thing. So it's about a relationship of citizenship, which was mediated through that light. But they hated the light. It was absolutely horrendous. You can't see it in these photos with this lighting. And what they wanted was something, they were very articulate about it, a lot of the people we talked to. They wanted lighting as part of an atmosphere that actually reflected the values of that space. Brandon 3 is people were in their 3rd, 4th generations of families, kids, and parents, and even grandparents had grown up on that estate and considered it a lovely estate. I can only agree. It was amazing. With this prison yard lighting, the message about the estate was, this is a sink estate. This is horrendous. Don't walk here, you will be killed, okay? And you had people from all the surrounding estates developing a sense of the reputation of that estate as deeply troubled, okay? Again, to make a very, very long story short, that's the bad lighting. And there's a brilliant film by filmmaker who used to be here, James Ratty, on Brandon. So if you go to our website, you'll find it. We were given the funding to do a pilot lighting installation based on conversations with the tenants where all these kinds of stories came out. And a lot of stories about what kind of space they actually valued, what they thought that community really was about, and about the different lines of communication between different elements of that community. It's a rather long story. And we designed, or Letra designed, a lighting installation for one strategic area in that estate where everyone always could see the potential. This is a meeting place. This is where we could all be. This is where people could come out and congregate at different times. We can even have block parties and so on, and they have. And it's really, really simple stuff. It was, let's block out those prison yard lighting. We put in those, everyone loves sparkly lights. And it's just, this is, if there's a universal in social science, it's the love of sparkly lights. So you got to put them in all over the world and just, they also create even illumination, so it became a shared space, well-defined, diffuse light that people felt comfortable in. The prison yard lighting was replaced by very directed beams from those trees, which just lit up the path, what people actually needed to know about, okay? Everyone thought that we'd massively ramped up the lighting level. In fact, we'd reduced it by 50%, okay? It was massively darker than it was before, but everyone felt comfortable for all the reasons that you'd expect, because there were more people out, eyes on the street, because the lighting was actually directed to get the information that people actually needed, like who's there, who's coming, where are they, all that. And it felt nice. And all those neighbors who thought that Brandon 3 had become a highly dangerous place were suddenly walking by on the way back from the shop and looking at this square and saying, oh, that's a really nice place to live. I wish I lived there. Okay. Okay. I'll just briefly then, I always tell stories too long. I think you're putting the slides up anyway, so if anyone wants to read text, you can see it later. Lily has been busy with our recent project, which is also a really interesting take on safety and security. This is for the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, the Legacy organization. And they were particularly interested in a study of assessing the lighting in the Olympic Park from the point of view of gender safety and equal access, basically. And it follows our normal, I don't have to go into all the details here, but we review the policies governing lighting in the park, going back to the beginning. We did a technical analysis of the actual light points there, measuring a whole range of parameters. And then Lily did all the fun bit, the qualitative social research of going out and actually identifying different kinds of users and non-users of the space. Understanding how they used or didn't use the park, looking at the kind of routes they took, finding the kinds of issues that might be important and that lighting could in some way address to support women and girls' use of the park. Just one interesting thing, you can hear in that what we're trying to do is bring together policy, technology, and social interaction here. A kind of, again, qualitative social understandings and interpretations of use. Not always easy. For the Olympic Park, what they originally wanted, what they thought a lighting assessment of gender equality would be just measuring a lot of lights, okay? And measuring how much light is being thrown by individual points of light. We literally call it point analysis, okay? This is a profoundly unsocial way of thinking about lighting and people's use of space. So on the right there, you've got different light point measurements. On the left, you've got quite valid generalizations you can make about, this area feels dark, feels unsafe because there's not enough light. You can't even see the bench that you could potentially sit in, and the wayfinding signage is completely obscured. Okay, so that's fine. Okay, but if you leave it at that, it's a very generic analysis of very specific points in a place, which again goes against a lot of social thinking. So a lot of what, you should be up here, but a lot of what Lily was up to is discovering that what does it mean to have these different light points when you had at least 5 radically different types of users of the park who are actually moving through completely different points. Okay, that's to say, you need to think about the routes that people are following, what they're trying to do there, where are they trying to get to, what are their experiences along the way, where do the uses of the place by different people overlap in different ways, either in a nice way or in an uncomfortable way. Like, who are all these guys on bikes racing through when I'm trying to walk back with my kid or my, whatever, okay? that sense of different gendered uses of the space. And then how, this is Lily's map of the different routes that different users were taking. And basically the argument here is that we've got probably 5 or 6 different Olympic parks, depending on which user group you're thinking about, how they're using it, and therefore how lighting might intervene along with other design elements in order to make it a more supportive space for the different people in their different ways. I've had quite a few guillotines here, so I'm going to stop now. Just one word, the third case study, which I haven't got around to, is in many ways our biggest project at the moment. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the happiest. It's a Horizon 2020 project where we're looking at lighting and aging, the health and well-being of aging populations in 3 European cities. This one is largely based around public space. It involves actually a full year, pretty much, of ethnography in each of those 3 places in order to understand the different social organizations of aging. It's don't talk to me about the elderly ever again. Not just because I am one, but because there's no such thing as the elderly, any more than there's any such thing as humans. We're actually looking at radically different ways of being old or performing age, or however you want to put it these days. And then therefore very different ways in which public space might be configured, partly through lighting in order to make it better for them. Anyway, I can take questions on that if you want. Thank you very much. I'm amazed how well people kept awake after lunch. That was well done. Thank you.